Censor readings for the constant wall. France is burning. Protests across France have caused casualties and disruptions, with 200,000 protesters calling for President Macron's resignation. Let's take a closer look at the ongoing protests in France. Currently, anti-government protests involving about 200,000 people are taking place all across France. The scale of these protests is gradually increasing. Protesters chant for a total blockade and demand President Macron resign over austerity measures. There have been 550 rallies across France. True to France's reputation as a nation of protests, these demonstrators showed signs of radicalization from the very beginning. Protesters used burning trash cans and tractors to build barricades, blocking roads and school entrances, paralyzing the city. They began throwing bricks and trash cans at police, and many unions went on strike, causing even more chaos. Due to some railway unions striking, local train services were delayed or suspended in several areas. Originally, this protest was supposed to be carried out peacefully, with actions like boycotting large supermarkets or banning the use of major bank cards. However, as some radical and hardline groups joined in, the protest turned violent and changed in nature. During the protest, 473 people were arrested, including 339 detained. 13 police officers responding to the protest were reportedly injured. In particular, it appears that a high number of high school students participated in this protest. The French Ministry of Education said classes were disrupted at roughly 100 high schools nationwide. Of these, 27 schools chose to go on lockdown. The French government deployed 80,000 police officers nationwide, but it wasn't enough to contain the anger of the citizens. Right now, France is in a state of chaos. In fact, President Macron has already seen 4 prime ministers step down in just 2.5 years. Protests erupted again as new Prime Minister Lecornu was set to take office on September 10th. The shocking part is the whole cabinet resigned just over money. Former Prime Minister Bayrou cut 2 public holidays and froze spending on pensions, health insurance, and social security to save 44 billion euros, about 71.6 trillion won, from next year's budget. However, he met strong parliamentary opposition, and after repeated bill rejections, he had to resign. France's financial situation is so dire that there's seemingly no solution. The European Union announced that France's national debt will reach 3.3 trillion euros, or over 5,000 trillion won in early 2025. It reached 114.1% of gross domestic product, the 3rd highest in the European Union after Greece and Italy. However, while Greece and Italy have recently reduced their fiscal deficits, France's deficit continues to increase. It might be easier to understand if you think of it as piling up 3 billion one at a time. Due to this, France's fiscal situation is so dire that some are discussing the International Monetary Fund potentially lending money. The problem is, France can't even raise its tax rates any further. Raising taxes previously sparked the Yellow Vest protests in late 2018, which upended France. But now, the situation is even worse than it was back then. France still hasn't recovered from the economic damage caused by COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. Because of this, they can't suggest raising taxes again, which makes sense since France already has high income tax rates. In France, earning 180,294 euros, about 293 million won, a year means a 45% top income tax rate applies. On top of that, various social security contributions like insurance premiums are deducted separately, so high-income earners in France end up paying about half of their income in taxes and other charges. In France, wages are valued less than capital income and other sources. Because the tax rates are so high, in order to ease France's financial situation, they need to reduce spending. So the Macron administration proposed an austerity budget, saying they wouldn't spend even 1 more euro except for the defense budget, and this sparked strong backlash. All prime ministers who resigned so far did so while pushing the budget. France is known as a welfare paradise. Medical care at the hospital is nearly free. The government gives a childbirth allowance for newborns, and parents on leave get parental benefits. This system has long made the French proud of Europe's strongest social safety net, but it came at a high cost. Currently, 31.3% of gross domestic product goes to welfare, well above the European Union average of 26.8%. It's the highest in all of Europe. Naturally, this means the burden the country has to bear is also much greater. However, after COVID-19, the fiscal deficit has snowballed, making it impossible to keep increasing spending like before. The government wants to cut spending, mainly targeting welfare budgets such as pensions, healthcare, and social security. They've impacted the heart of French society, causing public backlash. People are now told retirement age is rising and benefits are shrinking after a lifetime of work. Naturally, they can't accept this. On top of that, taxes keep going up while welfare is decreasing. As dissatisfaction grows, anger has exploded. All the experts are saying the same thing. France's fiscal deficit can't be solved just by tightening a few belts. It's a structural problem. That's because the social security system has long failed to keep up with demographic and economic changes. If they cut welfare, there's strong resistance. If not, debt rises. They're stuck with no clear solution. Ultimately, these protests stem not only from opposition to austerity, but also from fears that France's welfare model is no longer sustainable. The French government has stated that some radical groups have distorted and taken over the civic movement, and while they are maintaining a hardline stance, they are also struggling to come up with measures to calm public anger. Sébastien Lecornu, who was appointed as the new prime minister following former prime minister Baylou's deal, stated in his inaugural speech that he would show a different approach in terms of form, methodology, and content compared to the previous government. He held talks with the leadership of the ruling party, which consists of centrist and center-right members, and also announced plans to meet with opposition parties, including the left and the right. However, opposition parties say it's pointless unless the government ends its austerity budgets. In 2018, France gained global attention with the large-scale Yellow Vest protests. The rise in fuel taxes caused the distrust then. With gas prices soaring, ordinary and middle-class people protested, saying they couldn't make a living. The protests paralyzed all of France and continued for nearly several months, but the gravity of the situation now is completely different from back then. The Yellow Vest protests began over rising living costs and taxes, but now involve national debt, austerity, and political distrust. Previously, President Macron eased tensions by retracting tax policies, but now the main issue is national debt, a structural problem that can't be undone, leaving little room to compromise. The Yellow Vest protests faded over time, but now the protests are so severe that a government collapse is being openly discussed. Experts say if the Yellow Vest protests in 2018 were a blaze, the protests in 2025 are a volcanic eruption. In other words, it's not just about reversing a single policy, but a crisis that could shake the very foundation of the French political system itself. These protests are more than a repeat of the Yellow Vest movement. They could be a second French Revolution threatening President Soumen Gay's regime. Right now, President Macron's approval rating is at 15%. With numbers like this, his approval rating is even lower than it was during the Yellow Vest protests in 2018. What's even more concerning is what lies ahead. These protests aren't just movements that end in the streets. They're becoming a main current that's shaking up the entire political landscape. President Macron still has time in office, but has lost so much power that people call him a lame duck. The biggest crisis is that no matter what policies the government introduces, the people no longer trust them. Even with a new prime minister and cabinet, distrust will remain. In the political circles, calculations over the next power structure have already become complicated. If President Macron resigns, France will need a new leader, and the country's course could shift dramatically depending on who takes over. If the center collapses and power shifts far left or right, political instability and a bleak economic outlook will follow. If austerity and protests persist, foreign investors will avoid France. If France's government bond interest rates fluctuate even a little in the financial markets, France's already astronomical debt will become unmanageable. If credit rating agencies downgrade France, the crisis could worsen faster. If things worsen, International Monetary Fund intervention may become necessary. If France collapses, all of Europe could be affected, prompting possible intervention by Germany or the European Central Bank. Ultimately, there are two possible outcomes. Will the government negotiate with the opposition and ease tensions, or will public anger escalate into a political crisis for the administration? Given the current atmosphere, the latter is becoming more likely. Experts think this situation is more than a social conflict and could reshape France's political and economic model for decades. In other words, France is not just facing a period of protests, but is standing at a crossroads that could open a new era. In many ways, because the country's economy is struggling due to COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, it seems that protests are breaking out in many places. I hope this ends well. What do you think about the protests in France? Let me know in the comments. That's it for this video. Thanks.